Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Luke Beckman looks at crop outputs in South America. Dan Gillespie talks about cover crops and planting green. Chuck Schroeder discusses the efforts of the Rural Futures Institute, and Tina Barrett explains how you can perform a financial tune-up on your ag operation. Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. U.S. exports during January saw a sizable increase compared to January 2016. Data released last week shows American corn shipments were nearly 72% higher than the previous year. Japan was the top destination for the month, but Mexico remains number one for the October through January timeframe. Soybean exports in January were up 25% from a year ago. From October through January, China accounted for almost 73% of American bean shipments. But another supplier is coming online, and its crops are projected to be big. The U.S. Department of Agriculture last week increased its estimate for Brazil's soybean output from 104 million metric tons to 108, and it boosted the country's corn total 5 million metric tons to 91.5. We talked with Luke Thursday morning and started by asking for an overview of the record crops in Brazil.
Well, right now everything is in good shape. USDA bumped their numbers a week ago for both corn and soybeans. Corn crop in Brazil, a lot of that's rooted in their second crop, which they just got done planting really in February. So it's a little bit early to say that it's a slam dunk that the production is going to be there. Acres were up for second crop corn in Brazil, and as of right now, the yield is substantially higher than a year ago, and of course the crop's still growing. So April will be important for Brazil's second crop corn. Typically that's when we see that crop pollinate. Bean yields in both countries, Brazil and Argentina, have been very good. Argentina is looking to get started anytime now, and that harvest window is drawn out over the course of a couple months.
Those USDA projections last week, how much did they impact the slide in prices that we've seen since they came out?
Yeah, I mean, really between the USDA, between some South American reporting agencies really upping production for both countries, certainly. I mean, fundamentally, it continues to look burdensome. U.S. had good crops, and Brazil and Argentina are set to have, monstrous crops as well. So certainly contributed. Technically, we just kind of ran out of steam, and we're in that 2 to 3 week window between the March report and the planting intentions and stocks reports, what's going to happen at the end of the month.
What do you think we'll see in that grain stocks report first?
Certainly a lot of grain, right? We're going to have a lot of beans. I think it's going to show us that there's probably not a lot of farm beans left. A lot of the beans are in commercial hands at this point, with the prices being elevated from November through recently. Farmers have had a great opportunity to get rid of old crop beans, and they have. Corn, I think you're going to see heavy corn stocks both on farm and in commercial hands. You're going to see a lot of corn in the western corn belt, which is going to hit home for our producers.
So no hope for real basis improvement then maybe, huh?
Well, we've been talking to our producers a little bit about that recently. I think that this pullback in prices has been to the benefit of producers to hopefully see that basis firm back up. There has not been a lot of farmers selling in the past couple weeks, so you maybe see an opportunity to see basis firm up here for the last half of March, first part of April, especially as we get into planting. But summer months, I think the end user knows that the corn is there, and they're not going to get too excited about getting out there and firming their bids up. So producers need to be vigilant. If we do see some basis improvement, that's when you start to have conversations about basis contracts, some way to eliminate the physical price risk that they have on the farm.
What cash price would be attractive right now for you?
That's a tough question just because the basis is going to dictate so much of that. You know, if you can eliminate that basis risk, those numbers are going to be softer than what these producers are used to for this time of year and even for the summer. So we're optimistic, though, as you talk about the Board of Trade, that we can see corn on the July board trade north of 4 at some point. You know, we're entering the two season, too wet, too dry, too slow, too fast, those types of things. So we're optimistic we'll see the board give us some opportunities with July futures above 4, and you can't write that bean crop off ever, really. So too much production risk in front of us to say that we won't have opportunities.
That new crop, where do you like some possible selling opportunities? I know the last time we talked, you thought if we could get new crop above 4, which we got to, you might pull the trigger. Expand.
Yeah, I mean, great opportunity to have made some of those sales when D's corn climbed above 4. If we get back up there, if guys miss the boat, certainly take a chance and lay some risk off. 410, 415, you know, about every dime that we climb above 4, producers need to be thinking hard about that. Look at the balance sheet. You know, it tells us that we're going to be pretty cozy. So there's a lot of money out there, though, too, looking for a home. A couple weeks ago, when we had the ethanol story, you saw how explosive the market was. There's a lot of money that wants a story in commodities. So producers just need to have a plan as we get into this seasonal time period where we see commodities rally, and be ready to execute when the market presents that opportunity.
You feel in general that this is just a different environment for the markets than it was maybe a year ago?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got South America's crop that's in great shape. A year ago it was trending in the wrong direction. We were talking about La Nina a year ago for the U.S. This year, I think there's a 50% chance that we see El Nino, which is favorable to Midwest crops. And you've also got the money situation. The funds were short a year ago. We've already been long, and we're actually coming back from that. So the market, even though the price of corn is very similar to what it was a year ago, Jeff, the market's very different than it was last year. So seasonally, though, we're getting into that friendly time period.
Next week, Roy Smith will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. In our previous episode of Market Journal, we talked about cover crop termination with Nebraska Extension's Rodrigo Worley. This week, Dan Gillespie from the Natural Resources Conservation Service explains the practice of planting green. USDA numbers indicate in 2010, cover crops were used on less than 2% of cropland across the country. But more recent independent survey data on the state level from Iowa State Extension and the national level from the SARE organization indicate adoption has increased. Much of the footage you'll see in the following interview is from the 2016 growing season in Pennsylvania and Maryland, where the concentration of cover crops is much higher than it is here in the Midwest. We talked with Dan at Nebraska Extension's recent cover crop conference, started by asking for his background farming with cover crops in northeast Nebraska.
Started in 2004, as I said in my presentation, as a result of intense erosion events after 13 years of continuous no-till. The soybean residue wasn't holding up its end of the bargain, so I decided to augment that with cereal rye, and it definitely worked to curtail end of the erosion, but it was the biological part of it that was the pleasant surprise.
Explain more what you saw biologically in the soil.
Okay, well, you see earthworms. You know, they're not the smallest of the creatures, but they're the most visible to us. And you know, just the first year that you park the tillage implement, you're out there planting, you're looking to see where your seed placement is, what your seed spacing is, and you find, you know, 2 earthworms before you find every kernel of corn. Then recently, the soil biology, the whole world of soil health, the information about the biology in the soil, the protozoa, the bacteria, the fungi, everything working together, you know, 5 billion bacteria in a teaspoon of soil, all that just, you know, I think farmers should be looking down at the ground underneath them and going, wow, what can I do?
Today you presented about planting green. When we say planting green, explain what that means.
Well, planting green means planting into a cover crop that isn't terminated yet. So, a number of benefits from that. Number one, in a corn-soybean rotation that has limited biological time for us to take advantage of growing season, then you can overlap the growth of the cover crop with the cash crop to a point where you're always aware of your soil moisture profile and what you can spend, or if you have irrigation, what you can spend and replace later to maximize the benefits, to get growth for IPM, IWM, integrated pest management, weed suppression, and then later on, as I pointed out, irrigation water use efficiency.
When are you terminating the cover crop then?
Well, again, that's a management decision. So, if I have a full soil moisture profile and normal rainfall in the spring, I don't have anything besides a young cover crop. There's no cash crop out there to utilize that moisture. So I'm going to plant and let them both grow until I see sufficient. Now, with the corn into this cereal rye, which is a very common cover crop in the state, in the eastern part of the state, you want to terminate, I would say, week, 10 days afterwards. Don't let the rye get too far ahead. With the soybeans, which is a legume planted into that grass crop, it's less of an issue. I know I did not terminate the cereal rye that was dormant planted last fall until May 19th of this year, but that was as much due to the amount of moisture we were receiving this spring and access to the field as anything else.
What are the crop insurance considerations that go along with planting green?
Okay, well, again, it's soil moisture management. Watch your profile, but right now, this area of Nebraska, the eastern part, is in Zone 3. And RMA, NRCS came up with a set of guidelines a few years back. And that is, the base guideline is to terminate the cover crop at planting or before emergence of the crop. And then you go down into some of the additional considerations, and it says if a no-till system is being used, you can delay it by 7 days. And then up to number 1, if it's dry, terminate earlier. If it's wet, terminate later. Well, this spring in Nebraska, eastern Nebraska, we had that if it's wet, terminate later, whether by decision or just not being able to get into the field. And then another consideration is there's a new technology rule also that I read and understand to say that if you are utilizing this new technology and you can show your crop insurance agent that you have 3 years that show that this new technology has not hampered your yields or maybe enhanced them, then you can get an accepted, recognized individual, maybe from Extension and another group, to sign off on that and be insured. But again, it always comes back down to management. Management always pays the best dividends, and I think this opportunity to plant green and grow cash crops and cover crops at the same time for a period of time may get us to the point where the cover crops become that much more valuable in our system.
Dan advises producers with any questions about cover crops and crop insurance to speak with their agent. The March Nebraska Farmer says if soil health is a focus for farmers, cover crops are a major part of the buzz. Nebraska Extension researchers have conducted numerous field studies over the last 3 years to help producers make decisions about planting cover crops. You can read about Nebraska Extension's ongoing efforts to measure the impact of cover crops in the March Nebraska Farmer. Tina Barrett from Nebraska Farm Business Inc. says this could be a good time for ag producers to perform a financial tune-up. In a recent Crop Watch article on the subject, Tina laid out 4 steps you can take to help analyze your situation. She joined us Thursday morning to explain why a financial tune-up could be a beneficial move for an operation.
Well, and we think about that with our equipment all the time and don't even think twice about sending the combine and the tractor in for those repairs, make sure they're ready to go. And we don't think about that so much from the financial side, partly because it's not so much fun and there really aren't huge consequences that we can immediately see tied to that. But at the same time, by having those financials in a good shape, it really can provide us a lot of benefits.
You've outlined 4 steps. Step number 1 is balance your financial records. Why is it important?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the cornerstone of your business, of having good records. And, we can probably put together a good business with shaky records, but we probably could put together a better business if we had those solid records. So, each of those steps kind of comes into play, and you may be already in step 3, But if you haven't gotten to the point where you're balancing records to your bank statements, and that includes loan statements, and making sure everything is accounted for in your records, that's certainly the first place to start.
Step 2 is keep meaningful records, and essentially does that mean splitting expenses for specific categories?
Right, sure. I mean, we could have everything in the program, but if you've got principal payments and expenses and non-farm expenses in with your farm stuff, they're not meaningful. We haven't done anything. So we really want to make sure that we're splitting everything the way it's supposed to be, even to the point of making sure that co-op bill is split between chemicals and fertilizer and fuel, so that we really know what you're paying for.
Step 3 is accrual adjustments. Now, does that mean you're trying to keep each year separate to try and find out where you are?
Sure. So, accrual can kind of be of a big step from cash. Cash everybody understands, and that's usually how we file tax returns, so it's kind of easy. But accrual is really trying to separate that out of that production year. So, we may be taking prepaid expenses out of this year and putting them into next, bringing those grain sales back into the year that grain was raised, those kinds of things, so that we can really see how that production year went.
And the final step is then to evaluate what you have. So you're talking about trying to get people to look at ratios. Why is it important?
Well, we have these, and lenders talk about them, and economists talk about them, and there really is an important thing there. And I kind of tell you, it's kind of like putting a puzzle together to kind of see. We have all these pieces, but until we start putting them together, we really can't tell the picture that's there. And there's definitely a story that your numbers are trying to tell you. And it may mean that things are headed towards a problem. It may mean that things are good. But if you don't know, it's really kind of hard to be navigating through this.
So which ratios are most beneficial?
I think that's really tough, because a lot of people want to say, well, just give me one number I want to watch. And, again, it's kind of like going back to that puzzle and saying, I'm just going to look at this one corner and assume that the rest of it's okay. And that really depends on your operation. Some of them become very important if you're highly leveraged. Then we really want to look at debt to asset ratio, our liquidity ratios like working capital. If you don't have a lot of debt, those ratios don't mean a lot. Maybe we're looking at our efficiency ratios and how well you're doing in turning those gross income into dollars that you keep. So it really depends on the operation, and it really kind of matters on putting them all together to get that whole picture.
You can find Tina's recent article on the Crop Watch website or through a link on the Market Journal homepage. The U.S. Census Bureau counts the country's population once every 10 years. Its most recent tally in 2010 showed more than 1.8 million people in Nebraska. That was an increase of 115,000 from the census in 2000. However, the number of people in rural areas, essentially for census purposes towns with less than 2,500, fell more than 5% and made up about 27% of the state's total. A little more than 4 years ago, the University of Nebraska established the Rural Futures Institute, or RFI, to help support and build communities in rural Nebraska. RFI is located on Lincoln's campus and last week named its first group of fellows to help in its goals. Chuck Schroeder is the Institute's executive director. He joined us earlier this week to discuss that news as well as RFI's efforts across the state.
The Rural Futures Institute is a critical part of the University of Nebraska in that it really brings the university to life in rural communities, not only in Nebraska but beyond. Our mission is twofold. Number one is to build the capacity of rural people to deal with the very complex challenges that they have before them, as well as the opportunities that they'd like to pursue. But in addition, and sometimes more difficult, is to build the confidence of rural people to feel that indeed they have the capacity to influence their future, to pursue the pathway that they would prefer for their community.
It might be helpful for me if you define what your definition of rural is.
Well, we have some fun with that. The statistics folks define rural as communities of under 50,000 population. But the truth is, when we're working in Nebraska and states, surrounding states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, you realize that we're all rural. We have a population of 1.8 million people here in Nebraska. That wouldn't even be a neighborhood in cities like Tokyo and Jakarta and Mexico City. So we don't get too wound up in what's rural. The truth is, we don't spend a lot of time and resources in Lincoln and Omaha because they have resources to deal with their own issues. But otherwise, we deal with communities across Nebraska and again and across our region. Because even what we sometimes consider small cities, micropolitan cities, Hastings, Kearney, Norfolk, Columbus, Scottsbluff. Those are communities that, while they have larger populations than we would typically focus on, they have a tremendous impact on smaller rural communities in their region. So we believe it's important that we understand what's going on there, the dynamics economically, socially, culturally, so that we can have a positive influence on an entire rural region.
Explain to me how it works, how a community works with you or you interact with communities.
Sure, that comes in several ways. Number one, we have a very important competitive awards program. We're going into our 5th year where faculty members at one of the University of Nebraska campuses will partner with other faculty, not only at the University of Nebraska, but at state and community colleges, with nonprofit organizations, with private companies, and in particular with rural communities that are trying to address an issue, whether that's in healthcare, broadband, K-12 education, leadership development, business transition, all of those issues that combine to create the particular mix in a community.
So is the goal to bring jobs to these rural communities, to improve the environment and the surroundings for these rural communities? How do you see it?
We try to influence the thriving, if you will, in rural communities. In fact, we have some work going on right now to better define that in data. But the truth is, it's not a single issue in any community. A community has to be economically thriving in order for people to live there. But we also know there has to be strong access to education resources, lifelong learning for people to want to live in a community. They have to know they're not disadvantaging their children, that they're not disadvantaging themselves in the opportunity for lifelong learning. There has to be access to quality health care. People need to know that indeed they're not moving to a place where, again, they're disadvantaging their families. It has to be a place that is taking care of the environment. We know that one of the great things about rural places is that they are in a natural environment. They are where they can influence the natural resources around them. So all of these factors must come together in order for a community to be that legitimate best choice for a young family looking for a place where they can come build a career, build their family, get engaged in a community where they can make a difference.
How will the fellows that you recently announced help you in your goals?
We're so excited about the launching of our RFI Fellows program. This has been a dream of ours really from the outset. So what we've done is now bring together in a lengthy process of weighing that right mix, diverse mix of talents and personalities, skills and capabilities. We now have 27 fellows that are appointed, and these include faculty members from various disciplines across the University of Nebraska, as well as faculty member from Peru State College. We have what we call community innovation fellows, who are proven leaders in rural communities in places like Auburn and Ord, smaller communities where we have leaders who have demonstrated the capacity to make a difference. They're helping us right now with our strategic planning process, really looking seriously at how we try to ensure that there is a thriving Nebraska, thriving Great Plains by 2030, because we believe if we can demonstrate in this region strong, viable, smaller communities where people can live, work, play, build themselves as human beings, we think it'll have an impact on rural people around the world.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. During this last week, we had several waves of energy moving in northwest flow through our region. Of course, the first one was we were talking last weekend was that we would probably see some snow on Saturday. Well, we didn't overcome the dry air, and most of the snowfall occurred to the south of us and to the southwest of us. And then we had a couple more systems move through this northwest flow that reinforced the cold air, actually intensified the system in the eastern United States, and we've seen blizzard conditions develop in the northeast. So that cold held on about 24 hours longer than expected in eastern Nebraska, but eventually it broke on Wednesday, and we've seen some warm temperatures move in for the remainder of the week. As we go through this weekend, it looks like we're going to see some continuation of those nice temperature trends before we start to turn our attention to an impending storm system that will move out of the western United States and impact the Central Plains during the second half of next week. So we're going to start to see some declining trends in terms of our weather as we progress through this week, and if we go to the upper air models, we'll see how this plays out. So for today, we have ridging in place, trough to our east with a system that moved through during the midweek period, kind of strengthening on the eastern seaboard, warm conditions for our region as high pressure dominates the entire Central Plains. We're looking at temperatures primarily in the 60s with possibly low 60s to upper 50s in the northeast. Precipitation remains in the western United States. Now as we move into tomorrow, we'll see another wave moving across the northern plains. This might bump the temperatures across northern Nebraska down 5 degrees, but in southern Nebraska we'll have a surface low that will pump up warm air into our region. There's not a lot of moisture associated with this, so we're not expecting anything but maybe an isolated thunderstorm late in the day across eastern Nebraska. The primary moisture will be to our west. By Monday, this system makes its way to the Great Lakes, and we'll start to see ridging pattern building back up, but we'll see a high pressure over our region with all the lows to our southwest. So we're really not expecting anything in the way of moisture, and temperatures will be still in their normal range. Most of the precipitation will remain to the east of us and to the west of us. Now as we get into Tuesday, we see this high pressure ridge building up, so we may see a little bit of a return flow. Temperatures boosted a little bit in advance of these low pressure systems that will develop on the front range of the Rocky Mountains, and will congeal as we go into Wednesday. So the major precipitations in California with just an isolated chance for moisture in western Nebraska, and this deep trough will start to feed moisture up into our region on Wednesday, and we'll see a surface low really starting to organize there during the latter half of Wednesday, and it'll start to move into our region as we get into Thursday. So by Wednesday we'll see the precipitation making it into the central Rockies, and that will start to make its way out into the plains as we get into the day on Thursday. This low pressure system really cranks up. It's going to wrap this moisture up around it, surface low down in southern Texas, and we will see that moisture move up into our region. Widespread precipitation right now is anticipated across Nebraska and points to the south, and this will move out to the northeast. There might be some light snowfall on the back end of it, and we'll start to see ridging take place into our region as we go into Friday. Low pressure to our north. Basically, most of the moisture will stay to the backside of it in the Pacific Northwest as yet another system starts to come in to the western United States, as you can see here on Friday. So the 8 to 14 day forecast indicates cooler conditions compared to what we've been seeing recently, and in terms of precipitation, a broad area of precipitation with a major storm system pointing toward our direction around the 28th of the month.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, planting into cover crops, the Rural Futures Institute, and performing a financial tune-up. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Next week, Roy Smith will be our market analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.